Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be really getting into a very tough event, a very tragic event in Oregon's history. We're going to be taking a look at the 1981 shooting at the Oregon Museum Tavern in Salem. You might have heard about this before. You might even know a bit about it. But we're going to go deeper. We're going to try to get to the nuances, the details that maybe you've never heard about before to really understand this devastating act of violence.
That's exactly right. We've gone through and we've collected a variety of different sources, news articles, historical records, all kinds of things to kind of put together a complete picture of what happened. We really want to understand all the different facets of this case, not just what happened, but kind of, all the different factors, all the different details that go into such a devastating event.
Yeah. When we look at the core facts of this case, they are very stark. They're very undeniable. May 7th, 1981, the Oregon Museum Tavern in Salem. A 25-year-old man named Lawrence William Moore enters the bar, and he opens fire. 5 people died, 18 people were wounded. And as we go through this deep dive today, we really want to look at the question of what can lead to such horrific violence, and what can we learn by really examining the specifics of this case.
It's an incredibly important question, and it's not an easy one to answer. But one of the first things we should do is try to understand what happened. Like, how did this actually unfold?
Yeah, let's unpack it. Let's start with the scene. It was a Thursday night. It was a ladies' night. It was a crowded tavern. It was about 10:30 p.m. on Front Street, Northeast in Salem. And the Oregon Museum Tavern, I mean, it was a popular spot. It was a well-known local spot. And on that Thursday evening, it was packed, right?
Right, right. So you have this lively scene, right? Thursday night, everyone's out, and then Lawrence William Moore, he walks into this tavern, and the information that we have tells us that he entered really quietly, almost immediately, pulled out a 9mm Browning HP handgun,
Correct.
and just started firing. There's no mention of any sort of argument beforehand. There's no indication that there was any kind of warning. He just walked in and started shooting.
That is chilling. It really is. And to think that reports say he was just aiming at the bar itself, just shooting at the bar. And then as people started to flee, as people started to panic, he turned the gun towards them, towards the patrons who were just trying to get out.
And you know what makes this even more disturbing is that he came prepared. He brought multiple magazines with him. The sources specifically mentioned that he reloaded during the shooting. So this was clearly not some kind of, spur-of-the-moment act. This was deliberate, a very sustained attack.
It's hard to even imagine. But in the midst of all this horror, the shooting didn't just continue unabated. There was some intervention. One of the patrons in the bar, and I mean, you have to think about the courage this took, they actually hit Moore with a pool cue.
Yeah. I mean, wow, that's amazing. And from what we can gather, that seems to have been the moment where things started to shift. After he was hit with the pool cue, other patrons tackled him and held him down, physically restrained him until the police arrived. It's just incredible to think about the bravery, the quick thinking that these people exhibited in such a terrifying, chaotic situation. They put themselves at risk to stop this violence. I mean, it's just remarkable.
It really is. But of course, we have to talk about the cost. The human cost of this event was devastating, and I think the details make it even more poignant. Initially, the death toll was 3 people. They died right there at the scene, and then another person died later at the hospital from their injuries.
Right. And there's a detail here that I think we should really pause and consider because it underscores the enduring impact of this event.
Hmm.
One of the people who was injured that night, Dennis Scharf, he actually passed away almost 32 years later, in January 2013, as a direct result of the injuries that he sustained during the shooting. That brings the total number of lives lost to 5.
32 years. I mean, when you think about that time frame, it really reframes how we think about the immediate aftermath of a shooting like this, doesn't it? The final tragic count, 5 deaths, 18 injuries. And we should remember it's important to say the names, acknowledge the individual lives that were so tragically cut short.
Absolutely. The sources list them for us. Lori J. Cunningham, she was just 22 years old. She worked as a paralegal. John W. Cooper, he was 27. Robert E. Hamlin, 24 years old, self-employed auto body painter. He graduated from Silverton High School. Alan L. Wilcox, also 24. He worked at an auto parts store and was a graduate of McNary High School. And then, of course, we have Dennis Scharf, who, as we mentioned, passed away so many years later at the age of 56.
5 lives, 5 stories, so much potential lost. Now let's shift our focus to the person who committed this act, Lawrence William Moore. At the time of the shooting, he was 25 years old. He was an unemployed mill worker living in Scio, Oregon, born in October 1955. And one of the things that struck me as we were going through the sources was the really stark contrast in how he was remembered by the people who knew him. Like, for example, his neighbors described him as, quote unquote, a typical country boy. They said
Uh-huh.
that he liked to go target shooting at home, which, in a rural area isn't necessarily all that unusual, right?
Yeah, and they also described him as being a polite person. They said he was a hard worker, someone who was often seen with his golden retriever Thaddeus. They said he was shy, punctual. So you get this picture of, an average guy, someone who on the surface at least just seemed totally ordinary. But then you have the recollections of his former classmates, and their descriptions paint a very different picture. And it just makes you wonder, what does this tell us about how we perceive people? Does this highlight the limitations of social interaction, or just maybe how we tend to see what we expect to see?
That's a really interesting point. I mean, it definitely underscores how difficult it can be to truly form a complete picture of another person, and also how outward appearances can sometimes be very deceiving. His former classmates describe him as disturbed. They said he was aloof. They noted that after he finished high school, he became more and more reclusive. And there were even instances where he would just walk away in the middle of conversations without saying anything. That suggests this whole other side to his personality, maybe even some underlying issues that not everyone was aware of. And it's this contrast that makes trying to profile people so challenging, trying to identify potentially dangerous individuals. It's so difficult because sometimes what's going on inside doesn't match what we see on the outside.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important takeaway from this, right? That we just can't always rely on outward appearances or even casual observations to understand what's going on with another person.
Absolutely. Human nature is complex. People are complex. So let's talk a little bit about the legal proceedings following the shooting. The trial began on October 6, 1981, and Moore's defense entered a plea of innocent by reason of mental disease or defect. However, he did admit that he was the one who fired the shots.
And the reason he gave, his stated motive, was quite unusual. He claimed that he was trying to apprehend a syndicate, a word that he used to describe a group of millionaires, Jews, and criminals all working together who he believed were trying to poison him. And I mean, that right there, that indicates a real detachment from reality, right? It points to these paranoid delusions.
For sure. And the jury ultimately did not accept his plea. He was found guilty on 4 counts of aggravated murder.
And he was sentenced to 4 life terms in prison. Based on the information we have, as of December 2024, Lawrence William Moore is still incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. His SID number, for anyone who might be interested in doing further research, is 5794821.
It's a stark reminder that even though decades have passed, the ripple effects of that day, of that night, are still felt very deeply by the victims, by their families.
Definitely. And in terms of how this tragedy is remembered, we should mention that the names of those who died are included on a memorial wall. It's a joint memorial wall located at Oregon City's Mountain View Cemetery.
And this memorial, it's dedicated to nearly 390 homicide victims. It was created by the Greater Portland Area chapter of Parents of Murdered Children, and it stands as a powerful reminder of the lasting impact of violence, the enduring pain that it inflicts on families, on communities.
For sure. Places like that, memorials like that, they serve a really important purpose, not just in terms of remembering those who were lost, but also as a space for reflection, for healing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's kind of recap what we've covered. We've walked through the timeline of the Oregon Museum Tavern shooting, the devastating loss of those 5 lives, the 18 people who were injured. We looked at the really contrasting accounts of the perpetrator, Lawrence William Moore, the very strange motive that he gave for his actions, the legal outcome of the case, and how those who were lost are remembered today.
And as you heard, even with all the facts, even with all the details laid out, trying to fully comprehend why something like this happens, why someone would do something like this, it's really complicated. The different ways that people describe it more really underscore how difficult it is to understand what goes on inside another person's mind, what drives someone to such extreme violence.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that brings us to a question that I want to leave you with today. How do communities cope with the aftermath of such a traumatic event? How do they process this kind of collective trauma? And what role do these memorials play, not just in honoring the memory of the victims, but also in helping individuals, helping communities to heal? Because when you think about the suffering that Dennis Scharf endured for 32 years as a result of this shooting, it becomes really clear that these tragedies, they don't just end when the headlines fade. Their effects are long-lasting. So as you go about your day, maybe think about that.
It's a really profound question. And there's no easy answer, but it's definitely something that we all need to think about. How do we create communities that are resilient, communities that can support each other through these incredibly difficult experiences?
And that's where we'll leave it for today. Thank you all so much for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.